Emilia Clarke is returning to Star Wars, or so that's what we think after we saw this answer from this interview.
Would you want to revisit your Star Wars character?
Well, you know what?
Let me take this question. I got this question.
Now, I've been wanting Emilia Clarke to return as Star Wars as Qi'ra for the longest time. Ever since I knew the Book of Boba Fett was actually in production, I had hoped for so long that Qi'ra would return. After Solo: A Star Wars Story, a lot of those characters have kind of just fallen off into the abyss of the unknown. We're not sure when we're going to get a lot of those stories. We heard about the Lando series, Darth Maul, Solo, but more specifically Qi'ra. But what's so interesting is that Qi'ra's story has continued on in expanded universe. You know, when you think about Star Wars, I think about a lot of media. I'm talking about comics, books, video games, and of course, live-action movies. And with that, we've seen a lot of original characters, for instance, like the Mandalorian, Din Djarin, who is probably one of the most popular characters in this new era of Star Wars. But the one issue that I feel like we have with Star Wars, and not just Disney Star Wars, but also Old Legends continuity as well, is there wasn't a lot of opportunity to transition characters from multimedia, for instance, books, comics, the expanded universe, into live action. And not just live action, but also characters from live action, like Din Djarin, the Mandalorian, into multimedia of video games and books and comics. You don't see that. Star Wars Outlaws is the perfect opportunity for this. You have a character named Kay, she's a smuggler, she's gonna be out in the Outer Rim doing her things with the crime syndicate, and of course we know this is post-Empire Strikes Back. This is the perfect timeline and the perfect opportunity to bring in characters that you wouldn't necessarily be used to seeing into video games, to bring them in, make them an integral part of the story, or just have an Easter egg or an appearance of them. I think it would be cool as hell to see Star Wars Outlaws bring in the Mandalorian or Qi'ra for an example, because we know this game is going to be heavily involved with the crime syndicate, and Qi'ra is one of those people who is affiliated with all of that nonsense with the crime syndicate and the underworld of Star Wars. Star Wars needs to take this opportunity now and bring in those characters. Now let's just talk about the other problem that I have with Star Wars in general, and that is not utilizing characters when actors want to play them. Emilia Clarke had already expressed her interest in coming back to the Star Wars franchise. Like I was talking about earlier, Book of Boba Fett was a huge missed opportunity to show someone like Prince Caesar or Qi'ra, of course. I felt like that would have been substantial to Boba Fett's story arc, and of course the crime syndicate as a whole, because that's what that entire story was about. Not having Qi'ra was a huge missed opportunity. But let's talk about Hayden Christensen and Ian McGregor. These are characters, these are actors that have played some of the most important characters in all of Star Wars, and because of the reception of the prequels, well, they weren't really allowed to do any of that for 20 plus years. That is when we finally were able to see Kenobi and of course Darth Vader again, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and they still to this day are very excited to play those characters. Now I'm sure we're gonna get something like that in Ahsoka and see some Force Ghost party, but at the same time too, I just don't want to see Star Wars give themselves the disadvantage of missing out on these opportunities to bring these characters, to bring these actors that, one, have so much enthusiasm to want to play these characters again, and two, miss the opportunity of these beloved characters no longer showing up in the Star Wars universe. For example, I always think about Peter Mayhew and David Prowse. These are some of the most important actors of all of Star Wars, and they're no longer with us. And it's an absolute tragedy to think that someone like David Prowse was never really at a Star Wars celebration. I don't want to see something like that repeated. Of course, I feel like Disney and Star Wars is in a much better state than it was before. So I just want to see them go in, bring all these characters in where there's opportunity. I'm not talking about Mandalorian Season 2, where we're just gonna have every single character show up. I think a nice little exposure of these characters coming in every once in a while, because there's also so much interest for a character like Cal Kestis to show up in The Mandalorian or some other show. Because the one thing that I hate to see is Star Wars fans that don't like animation or hinder themselves from encountering a new form of experience with Star Wars media because they don't like cartoons or animation, or they don't play video games because it's unproductive and a distraction. Whatever the excuse is, I think this is a fantastic chance to take on, because these people, these fans, have never seen, or perhaps don't even understand how important these characters are to the rest of the lore. So if I have one demand or one thing that I'm looking forward to the most is the opportunity to bring in a character like Qi'ra into the next live action series or perhaps even Star Wars Outlaws. Because when I think about it, fam, I'm always thinking about perhaps one of these characters like Kay from Star Wars Outlaws goes on this side quest and we see Qi'ra and we see Din Djarin in The Mandalorian. Or better yet, live action Cal Kestis in a live action Dr. Aphra. Because Dr. Aphra is another character that I feel like should be in the Outlaws game. But hey, I digress. Listen, Star Wars, if you're watching, so let's go. Come on, fam, go in on this, do this. It would be a wrap. It would be so sick. I would love that stuff so much. All I say is let's go, and I do not stop talking about Star Wars. Make sure you subscribe, fam, because I am so freaking excited to hear what you have to say about a live action Qi'ra or perhaps some of these other characters that you want to see in media show up in live action or a video game. Let me know below, and I'll see you later, alright? Deuces, fam!